Okay, well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here, for coming. It's great to be back here at Progressive Britain Conference once again in a position where we are, of course, getting ready and transitioning to thinking about what we could do as a possible incoming Labour government. And today we're talking about, of course, an incredibly important topic, which is growth. Growth, which is really about the ability to do more with less, and which has also been the driving force behind the progress of us as a species, of us as humankind. You know, for most of human history, life expectancy for humanity was about 30 years old. 40% of children died before they were 5 years old, and most of us lived in extreme poverty. And the reason we were able to escape from that, from the shackles of death and penury, was because we had sustained economic growth in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. It was economic growth that led to the proportion globally living in poverty falling by 70% since 1945. In my lifetime, down by 1 billion. And here in the United Kingdom, the reason we're able to create the NHS and to send every single child to school was because of economic growth. It was economic growth in the wake of the worst, most destructive war in our history that made it we could build a society in which people and places shared in growing prosperity after the Second World War. That's what growth can do. But of course, in this country, we haven't known growth for a very long time. In my entire adult life, we haven't really known economic growth. We've had a no-growth decade where our wages are £9,000 lower than they should be. That lack of growth also means that we have to pay proportionally more for the same number of hospitals and schools. And that lack of growth also leads to life expectancy falling in the most deprived areas even before COVID began. And we as a party, we need to fix that, right? We as a party need to make sure that actually we do have economic growth shared between prosperity, shared between people and places, so everybody becomes better off. After this decade in which we've seen the foundations of that systematically hacked away by this Conservative government, at the same time preventing the greatest threat to our future prosperity and to growth in the form of climate change. There is no economy without the environment. A burning planet is really bad for business. And also, of course, persuade voters that we are the people to trust to do both of those things. And today, we've got a brilliant panel who are going to tell us we're going to do exactly that. So no pressure. Big happy smiles. Of course, we have Darren Jones, who's zooming in from Bristol. I'm sure Darren doesn't need any introduction to anyone in this room. The chair of the Business and Trade Select Committee, one of the best select committee chairs I've ever seen in my life. So good, in fact, that I hear AOC refers to herself as the American Darren Jones. Hi. Polly Billington, as we all know, spent decades fighting against climate change, and now, of course, the PPC for Thanet, and Christabel Cooper, whose research we all read about how it is we are going to win the next election. So thank you very much for that. Darren, let's start with you. How we're going to get growth, stop climate change, and win an election. And you have 3 minutes.
Well, Jeevun, thank you for the introduction, both from me and my best friend, AOC. And I should just give a kind of health warning that I'm sorry not to be with you in person today. I'm on parenting duty. So if my kids kind of come through the door singing Let It Go because Frozen's on the TV, I apologize for that. Although I know Polly likes to have a bit of a musical sing, so maybe we can do it together in those circumstances. Look, I'm just going to speak for a very short few minutes to try to provide as much opportunity for discussion with the audience, because I think that's far more interesting than you listening to me. But look, economic growth, we've been looking at this on my select committee now for 3.5 years. It's a super inquiry that we've been doing over that whole time, looking at all of the different levers the state has to be able to try and pull and move the dial on economic growth. And look, it's not easy. There are no easy solutions. But from a Labour Party perspective, you will all know that Keir Starmer has put this front and centre. It's the #1 mission, but it's also the mission that underpins all of the other missions. Because as Keir has said time and time again, we can't do the transformation of the country or our public services unless we have a strong and growing economy. And as Jeevun was just saying, we are, if we do win the next election, inheriting 13 years of economic failure, from austerity to the handling of Brexit through to COVID and the energy crisis. Debts, national debt going up and up and up and up since 2010. productivity flatlining, economic growth barely moving, and a very long-term lack of investment, both in public and private infrastructure. And so that makes it very difficult, but it is the core to everything that we want to be able to do. What does it mean in practice? I know you've just had Mariana talking to you, and I've spoken to her at length about this. I know she has some very strong views on it, but it means really that we are improving people's pay so that they have more money to spend. And when you improve pay, obviously we get to tax a bit more of that and bring it into the treasury. It means our businesses are improving their exports. Exports have fallen through the floor in the last few years, partly because of a really poor quality Brexit deal, but also because the government thinks that they could just announce a trade deal and then let everybody else get on with it without actually actively involving themselves with business and helping exports to happen. The trade deficit went from 2 billion to 23 billion at the start of this year. So we need to increase exports, and we need to improve the productivity of our businesses so that they can increase their profits, again, so that they have more money to spend on investment in their people and their businesses, but also so that we can tax some of that and bring that money into the treasury. This is pretty basic stuff, but as Cllr has also said today, we also need to see a radical transformation of our public services. One, because we dramatically have to improve access, quality, and outcomes, but two, because ideally we need to reduce the cost of them. And in doing so, free up some of the fiscal headroom that we have in the treasury to increase investment in public skills investment and public infrastructure. These are really big missions, which is why Cllr refers to it in that language. Now, why is this progressive? It's progressive in my mind for two reasons. One, because of ideology. The Tories are absolutely stuck in the headlights. I can't even remember off the top of my head how many secretaries of state and business secretaries I've had before the select committee, but the world has changed and they don't know how to deal with it. They think that you just produce a strategy or a target or an ambition, and the free market will just do the job for you. They look at what's happening in America and in Europe, and they say, oh, they shouldn't be doing that. We should be doing free trade. We shouldn't be doing industrial subsidies or support for the net zero transition. That is against the rules that we like to follow. And they just say to the Americans and the Europeans, please stop it, as opposed to recognizing that the world has changed and Britain needs to change too. And so in the context of the role of the state and the competitive market that we find ourselves in, especially post-Brexit, it is a progressive-led agenda for growth, because we need a progressive government partnering with business and with people across the country for us to prosper. It's also progressive because we know that a more equal society, a more just society, has more opportunity for growth. We have to tackle poverty and inequality and geographical inequality, because we have to make the best of every single person that we have in our country, help them to seize the opportunities available to them, to help people start businesses, to be able to export their goods and services, to prosper in every part of the country, so that together we can secure the economic growth that we need to see. We can't continue in the way that we have done over the last 13 years, relying on certain sectors or certain parts of the economy or certain class of people to drive economic growth. This has to be a national mission that is open and available to each and every person and each and every region. That is a progressive agenda. And we know from business engagement with the Labour Party at conference, Cllr, Rachel, Johnny, I and others, we've been meeting businesses pretty much every single week now for a couple of years, but also in my role as the chair of the select committee, businesses are crying out for this new progressive partnership on economic growth and business. They are quite frankly fed up to the back teeth with the Conservatives. The Conservatives have clearly run out of road. They've run out of ideas. They've crashed the economy, and they don't want to be honest with themselves about what they've done. They should be ashamed of themselves. They say they're the party of business, the party of a strong economy, and they've done and delivered the complete opposite. It is political vandalism. It's a car crash, and people want a new start. And they're looking at the Labour Party, seeing economic competence, seeing the partnership we want to have with business, talking about industrial policy, talking about public investment in our infrastructure and the net zero agenda, talking about how we can improve trade. And they see that we are the party with the ideas, with the energy, with the hope and the optimism for the future of our country. And they want to partner with us. And so now it's just our job to make sure that we win the next general election and persuade the British people across all of those constituencies where we must win, that we are ready and that we are ready to get on with it. I know that all of you agree with that. And it's great to have these discussions and we should keep having them. But we then all should make sure we get out to our key seats, support our brilliant parliamentary candidates, some of whom you can see on the panel today, travel across the country as best you can, and put in as many miles as you can over the coming year to make sure that every single vote that we can get, we get into that ballot box so that we can get on and change the country. Thanks so much.
Brilliant, Darren. Thanks very much. Polly, over to you.
Can I pin to this microphone? Thanks very much, Jeevun. It's great to follow on from my good friend Darren. I'm not an economist, I'm a communication specialist, so I'm going to start with that as a campaigning priority and work from there. Fundamentally, growth is something that I think everybody in here will sort of, Jeevun has done a really good explanation about why growth matters at the outset. And that's important for everybody here to remember, because if we have it as a given, we forget that not everybody actually thinks that growth is a good idea. Now, there are two reasons why they don't think it's a good idea. One is that it's happened and they don't feel the benefit. Or two, they have felt the benefit and they think that's quite enough, thank you very much, and can we stop? And interestingly, both of those two groups of people are pretty critical parts of our electoral coalition. So I don't think we should assume that the goodness is evident to everybody. And also, let's be honest, it isn't. Because how you use the proceeds of growth is ultimately a political choice, and we need to be very clear about that. The other thing is, I'm just going to make sure that you all cheer here. Last week, we won Thanet District Council for the first time. For the first time since 1999. Now, I was very pleased to party like it was 1999, although everybody else thought I was being a bit old school about it. The fact of the matter is, that happened because we're reassured people. I stood on the doorstep and basically pledged that we were going to be able to keep the streets cleaner than the Tories had done, and we knew where our money was coming from to do the things that needed to be done. Now, there are some really big delivery challenges on that. Pledging that we are going to, for example, increase the number of GPs doesn't necessarily mean the GPs are going to come to Thanet. And that is part of the thing that really comes to the challenges about what that growth needs to look like. So we need to be very clear about where the money is coming from. People aren't stupid. They know there isn't very much money. So we can be sort of fiscally responsible, and that's a key part of our messaging on how growth will work. Now, we've done some of this as a response to a political challenge, but there is also a policy and delivery challenge here. If we have the highest growth as a target, which in the G7, that's fine. But what difference will it make? And that's the bread and butter question that we need to be able to answer, both for those who said, oh, yeah, you've always talking about growth, but we don't get any of it around here, or to the others saying, yes, well, we seem to have quite enough, thank you very much. Well, you might have behind your Farrow and Ball door, not everywhere else. So let's have a work on that. Obviously, that's not my doorstep. That's not my doorstep challenge. I'm much nicer than that. But so therefore, we need to make the case for growth. The growing of the economy hasn't benefited everybody, so we need to talk about what the outcome is going to be and how we're going to spend that, and also how we're going to invest in order to be able to transform our economy in the ways that we need to. That's about retaining value in communities. I know, for example, if we think about the Take Back Control Bill, of which I am very, very enthusiastic for lots and lots of very good political and policy reasons, and this is why I think we need to be able to grow this slightly. Take Back Control Bill has been framed as a solution to a political problem, in that we were against people having any control, and actually we're very much for people having control, and it's all about power. Well, unless that is a vehicle for transforming the economic prospects of places that have been neglected and feel powerless, we're really missing a trick. I think there's an enormous amount of possibility in the framing of that Take Back Control Bill to design things which tackle wider economic problems. I can't believe I'm in the same airspace as Mariana Mazzucato, let alone talking about the economy at the same time as her. It's like weird. But she and Georgia in the previous session were talking about the fact that we've got one one of the most centralised states in Europe. We've also got one of the most centralised economies. London sucks everything in. The 1945 government made some strategic decisions to deploy white-collar jobs in the public sector in other parts of the country in order to be able to create some kind of anchor for the economic growth in those places. We still send our driving licence applications to Swansea for a reason. Up until very recently, the benefits office was basically out in Long Benton outside of Newcastle for a reason. Or we might have been quite dismissive about some of the things the Tories have done in terms of putting some Treasury civil servants up in Darlington. Believe me, it can have some pretty distorting effects on the economy. I've spoken to our parliamentary candidate there, so don't assume that all of these things work straightforwardly. But we also need to understand that Take Back Control Bill, I know Cllr said, well, we'll work with the devolved powers that we've currently got. Those are concentrated around cities. There is nothing in the current devolutionary settlement that benefits somewhere like Thanet. I bet most of you couldn't even find Thanet on a map. If I told you it's Margate, Broadstairs and Ramsgate, then you'd get a bit better idea. It's closer to France than it is to London. It takes as long to get there on a high-speed rail as it does to Leicester. But it's much cheaper, weirdly. So the distortions, even then, even if it's cheaper, it's out of the reach of most of those people who live there with a 10% unemployment rate. The East Kent Further Education College is training people up for jobs that are not available locally. So when people say it's all about skills, remind them it's actually about economic choices, about where you're going to develop the growth that we need. So I would say that skills in itself is not enough. Now, this wouldn't surprise you, as somebody who's a massive campaigner for local power, to say that the centralising tendencies of the state needs to be resisted at all costs by a future Labour government, because we need to have confidence in local power, establishing the opportunities for people to be able to make those decisions, not just in terms of delivering what Whitehall says, but designing it in a way that will work for those communities. Decisions need to distribute economic opportunities through an active state, and we need to be thinking about this in one big economic constraint, which I think sometimes with the idea and the framing that we've got currently about growth can sometimes be forgotten. We have to live within planetary limits. Now, I know some people will talk about that as basically being a degrowth agenda, but we need to be able to find ways of using the resources that we've got as wisely as possible in order to be able to increase the prosperity of the greatest number of people. That means when we tackle things like climate change, we do it in a way that is equitable, differentiating ourselves from any of our political opponents, either those who think that only a market will work or those who think only degrowth will work. So a net zero local powers bill is one of the things that I think would absolutely transform the prospects of us being able to deliver that economic development in a balanced way, because if we're going to do climate change, if we're going to tackle climate change well, we can't do it from the centre. Whitehall is useless at it, and we need to accept it and recognise that if we're going to devolve power, we also need to be devolving economic opportunity too.
Thank you very much. And Christabel.
Hello. Excellent. Just wanted to say I do know where Thanet is. My mother's family is from East Kent, and I think I'm right in saying that we can now get from the train all the way through Labour councils to Dove. Can we?
I think we almost can, as long as you duck round Dartford.
Okay, that's fine. Always duck round Dartford. So I was speaking to an academic last week who described our current no-growth economy as being in a trilemma of fiscal badness. So lack of growth basically means that you either have to raise taxes, raise borrowing, or let public services deteriorate. And for Labour, this trilemma is particularly acute, given that we come under attack for raising taxes, we come under attack for increasing borrowing, and yet the public expect us to reverse the decline in public services. So being able to redistribute the proceeds of economic growth is realistically the only sustainable way that we're going to achieve this. There does seem to be a broad consensus amongst economists about many of the things that are needed to reverse Britain's growth problems. So investment in physical infrastructure, investment in human capital, so skills, childcare, building more houses, etc. But if growth was easy to achieve, then even the Tories might have managed to do it. And the reason they haven't is all these things require either large amounts of financial or political capital or both that the Conservatives have simply been unwilling to spend. So, when you see investment in large infrastructure projects like HS2, I mean, they are expensive, they can be controversial, they can be unpopular in some areas, and they will take decades to deliver value. That doesn't mean that they're the wrong thing to do, but it means that it's politically difficult. Now, Liz Truss was wrong about many things, but she was right about the importance of economic growth. Very sadly for her, the anti-growth coalition that she implacably set herself against turned out to be a description of the core Tory voter. And so, in some ways, actually, Labour government will find it easier to promote growth, certainly to implement policy around housing, given our electoral coalition is younger and less opposed to house building. And as a progressive party, we are instinctively more willing to intervene in the kind of way that Mariana just was talking about it with an industrial strategy. On the other hand, we are burdened by having to fight the underlying perception that we are bad with money. Labour is currently polling ahead of the Tories on management of the economy for the first time in 15 years. And it's been a really hard slog to get to this position, and we absolutely don't need to not lose that lead before the next election. Little plug here for the voter segmentation that we did at Labour Together very recently in our excellent Red Shift report. One of our key voter groups, a Stevenage woman, is about as middle of the road as you can get. If there's a middle option in a survey, she goes straight for it. She doesn't pay very much attention to politics. And so if the thing that cuts through at an election is that Labour has got out its big red credit card and taken it to the shop of really nice stuff that's actually quite expensive and slapped it down on the counter, we are in a lot of trouble. But at the same time, Labour needs to give these voters a reason to vote for us, rather than default to either backing the incumbent government or simply to staying at home. It's worth noting that according to Ipsos, 28% say that they and their family would be better off under Labour, 16% say the Tories, but 51% say it would make no difference. So if Labour is going to go for growth in a big way, it is inevitably going to mean some level of borrowing to invest. And we need to make a watertight case for it. The good news is that although voters tend to instinctively dislike the idea of government borrowing, there is evidence that explaining trade-offs or talking about borrowing in terms of things like mortgages or businesses borrowing to invest in capital can lead to people changing their minds. And we're together, Labour Together, are currently looking at how the public understands those trade-offs between borrowing and investment. Research that we've already done shows that talking about economic concepts like growth in the abstract has absolutely no resonance. And I'm sure people recall an anecdote from the EU referendum where a public meeting in Newcastle, the panel were talking about the impact of Brexit on GDP, and someone from the audience shouted out, "That's your bloody GDP, not ours." Yeah, exactly. So I mean, literally, as Polly was saying, when we talk about growth, we really need to make sure it just doesn't come across as something that just translates into bigger profits for faceless corporates or to enrich rich people who live somewhere else in the country, but means that we can talk about improvements in public services that impact people's everyday lives. When we talk about green investment, we need to explain how that links to reduction in people's energy bills. When we talk about creating jobs, we need to be clear about what kind of jobs they are, where they will be, and how they will be created. Labour has basically got the diagnosis right about the economy, but finding a way of making transformational long-term changes to the UK economy while holding onto our reputation for economic competence isn't going to be easy. It's going to take skill, we've got to be sure-footed about it, but I think we can do it. Thank you.
Three excellent contributions, I'm sure we'd all agree. Let's take questions from the audience. I'd like to stick up your hands if you would like to ask a question. I can't see, are there any women who would like to ask a question? Just because I can't seem to see anyone. No? Oh yeah, here we go. So this woman over here, this man in the front row, and then the blue shirt just over there. Thank you. There's a roving mic somewhere that I'm hoping is coming.
Hello, it's Mary from Nottingham. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to Darren Jones, my partner. We're both 62. He works for the Post Office. You have drawn a lot of attention in a good way to politicians who will actually take on the heads of, well, in that case, the Post Office, and ask them difficult questions. We're talking about growth, and obviously in that case, there's a lot of money seems to have gone to people at the top in the Post Office. Meantime, jobs remain under threat. So my question really is twofold. How do you get the Labour Party's view of growth across to people, the working people that Keir Starmer mentions so often, and how do you reassure people that that instance that, as far as the post office workers are concerned, where I come from, has been very popular, of you holding that man to account, that that's something that MPs in Parliament can generally do, so they've got confidence in why they should exercise their vote. Thank you.
Brilliant. One up at the front over here, if possible. I think one from the man over here and one from the woman behind. Thank you.
I'm Martin Hulst from Poole.
Hello, Martin.
In the old days, we were the workshop of the world. Then we became a nation of shopkeepers, and the shops are all closing. Now I think we could be described as a nation of consumers, and consuming rubbish sometimes from all over the world that's been produced by something near to slave labour. Now, in the 19th century, we had huge growth, but it only benefited a small minority of people, and we've got to see that that isn't so. After the war, which I do remember, lots of things were export only because we had to pay our way in the world, and we don't seem to be at the moment. So I'd like to say, and I know that was touched on, how we deal with exports, because it seems we've got the most dreadful balance of payments problem. So there's a few ideas that I'd invite you to respond to. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sabina Khan. So if I'm a business, just imagine Labour Party is a business and you want to go out and get a loan, you have to do a business plan. So what we need to do, what Polly said, is what does that mean for Thanet? You need to go and do a business plan as a Labour Party and say, this is where I'm going to put the green technological innovation. This is where the green technical university will be set up. So you need to turn that into a tangible plan for Labour. That's how you can sell growth to people. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think there was a question of the man in the blue shirt over there. Is that correct? Yeah, just straight there.
Hi there, my name's Patrick Lilly. I'm one of the new Westminster Labour councillors, and there's our leader. There you go. So my question's a bit of an echo of the very first person. In Progressive Britain podcast, there was an interview with Jim Tomlinson from the University of Glasgow, who said that obviously growth is the get out of jail free card. It means we can avoid borrowing, we can avoid put up taxes. But no one today on the doorstep said they wanted more growth. I was up in North London, no one mentions it. So what are we going to do to communicate this problem? And I think Christabel sort of referred to it, but it's the big problem. People don't know what growth is. So it's the wrong word for all of us to be talking about. So we need some help.
To the other man in the blue shirt, we'll come to the next round of questions. Darren, let's take you first. So I had 3 questions. How to get growth across to people, what this means for export, and how we communicate the idea of growth to people when it's an abstract now, where actually fundamentally what matters is how much money's in your pocket and what can you get for your kids going forward.
Sure. Well, thanks for all the questions. In my opening remarks, I talked about pay, profits, and investment, which is essentially the type of language I use when I'm talking about economic growth. Of course, when you're on the doorstep or at the pub or whatever, unless you're in a niche crowd, maybe we are a niche crowd, I don't know, you don't necessarily talk about GDP growth. But what you are trying to say to people is that we want to improve people's pay We want businesses to be successful. We want to be in a position where we can invest in people and the country. And people, I think, have a very clear feeling or understanding that we're not in that place now after years of Tory economic mismanagement. They know their pay hasn't been growing in line with their costs. They hear on the news, they see the economic news about businesses in trouble and the economy in trouble, and they know there isn't investment in their skills or their opportunities in their community because they're not seeing it, even though, of course, you know, the Tories promised levelling up and various other things over many, many years. So I'm all for talking in plain English, and I think, you know, pay, profit, and investment is the way to go. On the trade deficit, look, because we've left the European Union, there's going to be a structural realignment of the economy. There's no getting away from that, and so that will have resulted in some, you know, trade deficit figures coming through. The real question is, what do you do to reposition and restructure the British economy to be acting from a position of strength and growth as opposed to decline as a consequence of us being pulled out of the single market and the customs union? And there are things that we can do on that. I mean, the existing trade deals that we have are not great. I don't think it's about a race for more and more trade deals. I think it's about looking at the GDP opportunity, to go back to talking about GDP, from those trade deals. And of course, we've got a statutory review of the EU trade deal in 2025, which an incoming Labour government would have to make the most of in terms of getting rid of non-tariff barriers, trying to do more of a deal on the service industry, helping the automotive sector deal with some of the problems that are coming down the track for them. So there are things that we can do to improve the trade deficit, and I know that we would want to do so. And then just very lastly, Mary, to say thank you for your kind comments. I was just doing my job. There are lots of other MPs and committees that do excellent work week in, week out. This was a particularly egregious example, I think, which is why it got a lot of kind of airtime on social media and in the media. What it really shows, I think, is that one, Parliament has an important job to do, and holding governments to account, whether they are Labour or otherwise, is an important part of our democracy. But it also shows that, you know, company law is ripe for update in a number of ways, not least because I have seen a number of examples now, P&O Ferries and Royal Mail being two examples, where company bosses feel like they can break the law or act in completely unacceptable ways and just get away with it. And they often leave the business with bonuses or huge settlement figures. I mean, there has to be a better enforcement regime, both for bad corporate behavior, but also for breaching labour law. We did a recent inquiry of this on my select committee. We have a third of the number of labour law enforcement officers for the size of the economy that we have. It's just not enforced, and the employment tribunal backlog means that many people, even if they do get that far to wanting to pursue a claim, can't even get through the system. So a lot of the stuff in the new deal for working people and some of the comments and policies you've seen from the justice team, I think will help to underpin that.
Thank you very much. Polly.
Thank you. I think I agree with both the first speaker and the last one about the issue about growth. I think we've kind of agreed that the language isn't necessarily what we want to be doing and using. And I think Darren has got a useful frame. I'd also say it's about jobs. You know, when you've got, like in Thanet, you've got a 10% unemployment rate, you've got really skilled kids coming out of the local FE college, and they can't get jobs that match the skills that they've got. We're training them up to be able to be really quite high-end hospitality, for example, and various other things, and they would need to go to London in order to be able to use those jobs, to use those skills, but they wouldn't be paid well enough in order to be able to afford the bloody train fare. Right? So, and they can't afford the houses because people are coming down from London and pushing up house prices because we've got a reluctance to build homes, particularly ones, council homes. Who knew they might actually be an engine of growth to rebalance our economy? Perhaps we should start thinking about some of those things that really made a difference when we've been in charge before, and understand when we have been in charge before and we haven't done some of those things that make a really big difference. So I think that's important. When it comes to exports, I think we really need to be understand that we need to be playing to our strengths. We've got a creative industry, for example, that exports amazingly, right? We've got an enormous multi-billion-pound around creative industry, variety of creative industries. But because they don't make widgets, people don't think that they're making anything, but actually they massively contribute to the British economy, and we need to understand where that fits into our overall vision of what our future country should be like. And this is where I think it goes back to one of the things that Darren mentioned about what both Europe and the United States under Biden are doing with the, I can't even remember what the IRA stands for. Yeah, ERA, apparently you're supposed to call it, rather than IRA. Can't think why. Sorry, that's right. Inflation Reduction Act. The mission we need for the future, not only politically, but economically, is to be able to start painting a vision of what that's going to be like. So what kind of jobs are you going to have? We've committed to 25 billion, I think, a year on green investment. That's fantastic. That is borrowing to invest. But what does that mean when I'm standing on a doorstep? I can't say you're going to spend 25 billion that we haven't got on jobs that people don't know or understand, on energy that they can't see, right? So I believe in this passionately. It is absolutely the way we will be able to transform our economy, not only to have a competitive edge globally, but also to be able to mitigate some of the greatest risks that we have economically, environmentally, and for our own health. So I believe in it. But I don't think a big number on its own is where it needs to be. And the 5 missions and that financial commitment needs to now starting to be described in terms of what will happen in my community that will be different and better. So what is going to happen in terms of infrastructure? Am I going to be able to get to and from work in a way that I can afford? Is there going to be better infrastructure? What does that infrastructure going to look like? Where are the jobs going to be? Who is going to be able to do them? For example, this is an anecdote which will entertain you. I've spent a long time talking about the offshore wind farm off Liverpool, which Steve Rotherham finds very annoying that Liverpool itself can't own, and probably most of the jobs that were generated weren't actually engineering jobs because there were Danish engineers coming to Liverpool to build the offshore wind industry, and basically the only jobs that Scousers got was putting them up in hotels. Well, interestingly, when we had a wind farm built off Thanet, everyone said, oh, they're all bloody Scousers. I'm thinking, did those Danes pick up a Scouse accent and come down? I don't know, right? But what's interesting is that people will see skilled jobs and they won't see they're there for jobs around here, for people around here. So that's one of the things that really is important for that kind of rebalancing. This will need to be portrayed in bread and butter things about what will happen differently in your community. And that will also mean creating stories which enable people to feel confident about things that currently they're frightened of, and that includes house building, because houses tends to be houses for who, i.e. not for me, not for my family. Yes, of course we're not against houses, just not round here. Well, what is it that people are frightened of about their communities growing? And we will need to be able to have a really strong case for that, because without it, we will still be having extractive economies and overheated places like London, which end up with other places just completely overlooked forever.
Very much. And Christabel, the final.
This is the danger of going last, in that I have very little to add to what Polly said, other than to really very strongly agree with her, that we absolutely should not be talking about growth in just the terms of growth. It needs to be related to people's lives. And the only thing I'd add is, not just jobs, but public services. I think, when we did some message testing and you sort of say we need growth in order to fund the NHS, people get that as well, because they can obviously relate to the NHS. But it has to be something that relates to people's lives and to their locality, as Polly very much highlighted. So, absolutely.
Great. Let's go to our next round of questions. This man in the blue shirt, who I apologise, I pointed to the wrong man in the blue shirt at the previous round. The young woman over here, and then I think there's a man right at the back over there. So, yeah, sorry, I'm unclear. So, the roving mic, man in the blue shirt over there, maybe we start with him. And then I'll be a bit more helpful by pointing out next time.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for a brilliant discussion so far. I think Polly just started to touch on it, but I think the way a lot of people perceive growth is through housing. For most people, it's the only asset they have, and those have grown exponentially in values. So if you're in that, it's good. But there's lots of people, not just young people, but also maybe people who aren't in couples who have divorces, can't get back into housing in their 20s, in 30s, 40s, 50s even. But there's huge perception of any housing anywhere, whether it's 1 or 2 houses in the street or kind of big council estate, whatever, there's massive resistance to it. And talk about how it connects with everyday's individual lives, it's clearly a problem we've all identified, but politically, across all parties, and kind of disappointingly, even in our own party in the past few weeks, we've had kind of people playing to the local political concerns and not using the bigger picture. So how does that fit in with the localism we're talking about when we've got to build 300,000 to 500,000 houses a year for the next decade?
Great.
Hi, I'm Dan McTiernan. I'm a former employee of Darren's. So yeah, great to see you virtually. Hope all is well in Bristol. The panel just touched on unemployment, and I think as a student studying at the moment, a very big thing is AI. And, you know, I find many of my peers get quite excited about the idea that they can do large bulks of their degree, you know, through platforms like ChatGPT, but obviously there's something quite terrifying about, you know, the prospect of maybe being replaced by it. So how would a Labour government work with ChatGPT in a way that, you know, nurtures efficiency rather than, you know, having adverse effects on employment? Thank you.
Brilliant. And then one more question straight up over here.
Hi, hello, Amina again. Sorry, guys. I just wanted to ask quickly about what you said, Polly, is really important about localism and about the local story and linking up the local economy. What is Labour doing in terms of working with local leaders and local councils? That's a joined-up piece of work that Labour needs to be doing. Councils and council leaders know their communities. They know the language to be able to speak on the doorstep. We've won some amazing councils up and down the country. What is National Labour learning from those councils, or could it learn from those councils in the language that they're using around growth?
Great. Let's go. Christabel, do you want to go first on any of those?
I'll go. I was going to take JP's question actually on housing. As a former, I'm down on the schedule as a councillor. I'm actually a former councillor, but just what is interesting reflecting on my experience as a councillor is that for anything you want to do new, you get a barrage of emails saying, I don't want this. But it's from the people who are already there. So if you build houses, there actually might be a wider benefit, even a wider electoral benefit in building those houses, because then the people in those houses will vote for you, but they just don't exist yet within that electoral space. If you build, you know, a cycle lane, it's the people who will cycle who will appreciate that cycle lane, but it's the people that own the cars that will object. So I think in a lot of cases, actually, we do need to have the confidence just to say, and also, you know, as I mentioned in my comments, Labour is more fortunate in its electoral coalition than the Tories, in that it is a bit younger, it is inherently less opposed to house building. But I think we should have the courage to actually just do it, because in the end, there are more people that need houses than there are people that object. I really do think that, and I think we should have the courage to say that.
Polly, do you want to go second?
Yeah, basically, I just agree with Christabel about houses. Just build houses that are truly, genuinely affordable for local people. It's what we did in 1945. It transformed the prospects of generations of people who now are saying, oh, no, not round here. And it's like, remember how your family felt when they could go through a door and knew that they would be able to afford to keep that roof over their head, and that they could walk to school and walk or easily get to work. Those kind of transformational things made the difference for generations of my family, and I can see that is not possible at the moment for people in Thanet who deserve better and across the country. Amina, but it actually goes to Amina's question, right? Why aren't we learning these lessons about how people do things locally and translating that into a national strategy? I put the challenge straight back. I'm a councillor in Hackney, right? So I know how difficult it is. London boroughs are different, very, very different from elsewhere. So I'm not suggesting that I know how challenging it would be to be in a district council or a county council, or indeed in a combined authority in another part of the country. But the reality is, enable the leaders in our communities outside of Westminster and Whitehall the confidence to be able to strategize, and you will get a strategy, right? If you leave them just to deliver on the schemes that are designed entirely in Westminster and Whitehall, they'll deliver all right. But if you make sure that you are actually saying, well, what are we learning here from what it is? I mean, I can see lots of PPCs around the room. We'll all say, oh, our place is very different, very special. But I also know that we've actually got quite a lot in common, because that's what's written on my Labour Party card, that we've got more in common and we achieve more together than we do alone. So shall we think about those things that are commonalities, draw that from our local communities, and make sure that we have a strategy that empowers those people, and that is something where you can say, if it doesn't improve our health, improve our economy, and or improve the environment, has to do 2 out of those 3 things, we don't do it. Now you might say, well, why didn't I think of that? That was Leeds City Council, set up their strategy about 6 years ago, did that. No decision is made that doesn't go, environment and health, yeah, no, that's okay. Economy and, right. It's quite straightforward. Those things are being done by elected Labour leaders across the country, and we ignore that kind of insight at our peril.
Great. And Darren, so we had a question on housing, the threat or indeed the opportunity that AI presents, and the role of council leaders in promoting growth.
Sure. To no surprise to anyone that knows me, I'll start with the tech one. Dan, it's great to hear from you again. I loved how you phrased your question. You said, how is a Labour government going to work with ChatGPT like it's some sentient being or a kind of voter or kind of state? I thought that was quite telling in the way you phrased the question. It's not that yet. So, we don't need to panic. But look, when it comes to tech and AI as a general purpose technology that underpins lots of other things, there are 3 things that we will want to do. We'll want to be the best at it. We want to use it to transform the country and our public services, but we will have to guarantee that we do so in a safe and ethical way. We want to be the best at it because that underpins our brilliant universities and research and development capacity in our country. We want it to transform the country and our public services because we won't do either without it. And we can guarantee that it is safe and ethical, both because we have the political and legal mechanisms to do that really well in the UK, but also because it provides a great opportunity for global leadership for Britain. Britain has a great opportunity, a great niche in this space because of our excellence on the 2 points that I've already mentioned, to lead the global debate, which I think will have a return on investment for Britain and the British economy and our role in the world in the future. And so we should both be excited by it, but recognize that there is a role for the state in the middle of it. And I think we could, transform the country by getting that right. In terms of housing, my only observation, this is going to be a very Bristol-based answer. So constituency hat on. Bristol, I think, is now the 2nd most expensive place in the country to live outside of London. The mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees, whose term ends next May, has been a brilliant mayor for 2 terms. One of his key priorities was building houses. It was number 1. It was on billboards and kind of buses. And I don't get any complaints at all, really, from constituents because they want to live in them. The emails I get are, how do I live in these new houses? Because the demand is so important, because people's, the housing situation is so bad for so many people in the city. They want to see us delivering these. And there's a really positive way of, I think, selling that to people. And then just lastly to mention, on terms of local leadership, I mean, it was great. I'm the political lead for the Southwest on the National Campaign Committee. We were thrilled we won really big in Swindon and Plymouth the other week, and I saw the brilliant photos of our leaders in Plymouth and Swindon and others with our leadership up in Westminster, and I'm sure that will continue.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Darren. And that is, unfortunately, all that we have time for today. A huge amount of inspirational, indeed, and insightful comments from everyone on this panel about why we need growth, indeed, the ways in which it can make us better, and the way we have to communicate that to be better. The final thing I will say to you all is this: it's great that we come here together to talk about ideas for the next general election and talk about ideas we want to take into government, Before we do any of that, we actually have to get into government. We have to go win to get into government. And to everyone in this room, it's wonderful to see you here, because you also please go campaign in your marginals across the country near you.
You've got one Saturday off.
And that's true, by the way. This is your one Saturday off. Please do go down wherever you are near. Do come to Thanet. And yes, do also please come to Loughborough. I will buy you however many coffees and pints you want. Massive high five, but let's go knock on some doors and win the next election. Thank you very much.